The humble visit. It was a Tuesday afternoon, quiet, overcast, and oddly calming. Most people in the city didn't even know about the soft opening of Reeves Plaza, a luxurious, state-of-the-art shopping mall quietly built just outside downtown Los Angeles. Unlike the grand, paparazzi-filled ribbon cuttings the city was used to, this opening was different. There were no gold scissors, no red carpets, and no flashing cameras. Just the mall. And Keanu. He strolled into the mall through a side entrance, not because he was trying to be sneaky, but because that's just who he was. Keanu Reeves didn't seek attention. He never did. Dressed in a faded black hoodie, relaxed jeans, and his signature scuffed Converse sneakers, he looked like any regular guy out for an afternoon walk. Only he wasn't. He was the reason Reeves Plaza even existed. The mall had been his silent passion project, a vision born from watching small businesses suffer during the pandemic. Keanu didn't just want to build a mall. He wanted to create a space where entrepreneurs could thrive, where families could find joy, and where the community could come together without judgment or class barriers. That's why it had a unique blend of upscale brands and independent local shops. That's why it had a free community library inside and a kids' play area with no entry fee. It wasn't just a mall. It was a statement of hope, and no one knew. As he wandered past shopfronts, Keanu kept his hood low, but his eyes wide open. The smell of fresh pretzels mixed with high-end cologne. Soft jazz played from the overhead system, blending into the chatter of couples and the excited laughter of children. Keanu paused in front of a small bakery run by a middle-aged woman named Rosa, whose dream had always been to own her own store. He had personally approved her lease, giving her the first 6 months rent-free. She didn't recognize him as he stood there watching, smiling warmly as she passed a cookie to a small girl with Down syndrome, refusing to charge her. That was the kind of tenant Keanu wanted here, and it made him proud. He continued walking, turning the corner toward the food court. That's when it happened. "Excuse me, sir," a deep voice interrupted. Keanu turned to see a tall man in a security uniform approaching, his partner close behind. "Yes," Keanu responded, friendly but curious. The guard eyed him up and down. "We've had a few reports of a loiterer near the food court. Do you mind telling me what you're doing here?" Keanu blinked, then gave a small chuckle. "Just walking around." The second guard stepped in. "This area is private property, sir. If you're not shopping or dining, we're going to have to ask you to leave." Keanu raised an eyebrow, amused more than offended. "It's a mall. People walk in malls." The first guard crossed his arms. "Look, we've had a few complaints. You've been standing around staring into shops, not buying anything. We don't want trouble." Keanu sighed. This wasn't new to him. He'd experienced this sort of thing before, being mistaken for homeless or treated like a nobody just because he didn't fit the stereotype of a billionaire actor. But still, it hurt. Not for himself, but for what it meant about the world. "I understand," Keanu said simply, "but I'm not causing any trouble. I'm just taking a look around." "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to exit the mall." "Now," the second guard said, his tone sharpening. A small crowd started to notice the exchange. A teenage boy nearby whispered to his friend, "Dude, that guy kinda looks like Keanu Reeves." "No way," his friend replied. "Keanu wouldn't dress like that." The irony was almost poetic. Keanu considered revealing his identity, but something stopped him. Instead, he gave the guards a polite nod and began walking toward the exit, his steps calm and controlled. But inside, something stirred. It wasn't anger. It was disappointment. Not in the guards, they were just doing their job, perhaps a bit too aggressively, but in the idea that kindness and humility could make someone invisible, that dressing like an average man meant being treated like less than one, that security in some places wasn't about protection, it was about perception. As he reached the door, a young woman behind the counter of a bookstore called out. "Wait," she yelled. The guards froze. Keanu turned. I think that's Keanu Reeves, she said, stepping out, a book still in her hands. Now the crowd really started murmuring. Someone pulled out a phone. Another began comparing pictures on Google. The guard stiffened. Mr. Reeves, one said, now clearly uncomfortable. Are you? Keanu looked at him, not with anger, but with quiet understanding. I am, he said softly. But I don't want any attention. I was just looking around, making sure things are okay. The second guard looked like he wanted the ground to swallow him whole. I'm so sorry, sir. We didn't know. Keanu nodded. That's the point, isn't it? And with that, he stepped out into the fresh air, leaving a stunned silence behind him. But this wasn't the end. This was just the beginning. The story of Keanu Reeves being kicked out of his own mall spread like wildfire. It wasn't long before news outlets picked it up, spinning the tale into headlines like, Keanu Reeves mistaken for loiterer at mall he secretly owns. Security guards kick out Keanu Reeves. Their reaction says it all. The kindness of a humble billionaire. And the world that still judges on appearances. But for Keanu, it wasn't about the headlines. It wasn't about revenge or public sympathy. It was about making things better. The next day, without cameras or press, Keanu returned. This time, he walked through the staff entrance. A silent return, a loud message. The sun had barely broken through the Los Angeles sky when Keanu Reeves pulled into the underground parking structure of Reeves Plaza the following morning. No entourage, no black-tinted SUVs, no personal assistant at his side. Just Keanu, alone. He took a deep breath before stepping out of his modest, eco-friendly car, an older model hybrid he'd driven for nearly a decade. No one would suspect the man who parked in the farthest corner of the employee section to be the silent investor behind one of the city's newest and most buzzworthy luxury malls. And that's just how he wanted it. Still wearing his low-profile hoodie and jeans, this time cleaner, but equally simple, he headed through the staff entrance with a quiet determination. What had happened the day before wasn't just a misunderstanding. It had stirred something deeper in him. A conversation that had been bubbling beneath the surface for years. What does humility look like in a world obsessed with status? What does kindness look like when dressed in faded sneakers? What happens when we judge others because they don't fit the mold? And more importantly, how do you fix a system when you're the one who built it? The meeting that never happened. In the modest third-floor administrative wing, designed not for show, but for purpose, Keanu walked into the director's office unannounced. The manager, a polished man in his early 40s named Brian Callister, was mid-sip of his morning espresso when he looked up and nearly choked. Mr. Reeves, he gasped, leaping to his feet. I wasn't expecting. Keanu held up a hand with a faint smile. Relax, Brian. No press. No drama. I just want to talk. Brian nodded nervously, gesturing toward the seat across from him. Of course. Anything you need. Keanu sat down slowly, fingers laced together. Yesterday, I walked through this mall. Unrecognized. That part. I didn't mind. I've always preferred the quiet corners of the room. Brian chuckled weakly. That's very on brand for you. But I was escorted out, Keanu continued, his tone calm but serious. Your security guards didn't see a man who might be observing or even evaluating. They saw someone who didn't belong. Brian fidgeted, I heard. Social media sort of exploded last night. That's not why I'm here, Keanu said firmly. I'm not angry, but I'm reflective. He leaned forward slightly. I built this place to be different, Brian. Not just another flashy shopping hub where only those who look the part are treated with respect. I wanted it to be human, kind, welcoming. But yesterday, I saw cracks. Brian swallowed. Understood, sir. I'll review security training personally. Keanu nodded. Thank you. But I want more than a policy change. I want culture change. That starts at the top. Brian blinked. You want me to. I want everyone who works here, from janitorial staff to security, to go through empathy and inclusion workshops. Real ones. Paid, not optional. I'll fund it. I want this place to become a case study in kindness. Let's teach people to treat others like humans, not categories. Brian sat back, stunned. You're serious? Keanu smiled faintly. I usually am. Downstairs, in the quiet corners, while Brian sent off emails and made hurried calls, Keanu didn't linger. He slipped out of the admin wing and made his way back into the mall, not through the grand entrances or upper-level lounges, but through the maintenance hallway, where janitors stored supplies and food court workers took breaks. He passed a young man mopping the floor while humming softly to himself. Morning, Keanu said warmly. The man looked up, startled. Morning. You've got the cleanest floors I've seen in weeks. The janitor laughed. Well, I try, you know. Don't want people slipping in front of the Gucci store. What's your name? Louis. Well, Louis, thank you for what you do. The young man grinned. You look kind of like Keanu Reeves. Keanu winked. I get that a lot. Then he kept walking. He visited the food court next, where Rosa, the baker from the day before, was busy decorating cupcakes. Keanu watched from a distance, his heart warmed by the care she put into each swirl of frosting. He finally approached her. Excuse me, he said. Rosa turned, her smile immediate and warm. Yes, sir. What can I get you? Keanu reached into his pocket and pulled out a $100 bill. Just one cookie. And the rest, please, give out to kids today. On me. Rosa hesitated. You're him, aren't you? He gave a gentle smile. Depends who him is. She chuckled. My son's obsessed with you. Matrix, John Wick, the works. Keanu nodded. Your cupcakes are the real stars. She offered him a warm oatmeal raisin cookie wrapped in wax paper. He took it gently. Thanks, Rosa. I'll be around. The ripple begins. By noon, whispers were spreading again, not from tabloids or Twitter, but from the people inside the mall. Did you see that guy who looks like Keanu helping the barista fix the coffee machine? He sat and read to the kids at the library corner. Just like that. No way that's actually him. But it was. And his presence was doing more than turning heads. It was shifting hearts. When Keanu sat beside a homeless veteran named Frank outside the plaza entrance and shared his lunch with him, passersby didn't just stare, they joined. A man from a suit store brought a pair of dress shoes for Frank. A teenage girl gave him a hoodie. A mother handed over a sealed lunch bag and asked if he needed a ride to a shelter. It wasn't about Keanu anymore. It was about kindness. Catching. Spreading. One moment at a time. Back at the security desk. That afternoon, the two security guards who had kicked Keanu out were called in for a private meeting. Their names were Daryl and Thomas, both men in their late 30s, good at their jobs, sharp on policy. They'd been trained to spot threats, to act fast, to keep things under control. But they hadn't been trained on how to see. Not really. The director sat with them in the small operations room. You're not in trouble, he began. But Mr. Reeves has requested something different. Daryl looked down, shamefaced. I feel like a fool. Thomas nodded. I didn't mean any harm. He didn't look like the kind of guy who. Brian stopped him gently. Exactly. That's the problem. And that's why we're changing things. He handed them each a small card. On the front, it read, People matter more than appearances. Lead with kindness. On the back, it simply said, Keanu. Evening reflections. As the sky turned gold and pink, Keanu sat alone on the rooftop garden he had designed himself. It was peaceful up there. Few people even knew it existed. Just a few benches, some native plants, and a view of the city skyline. He sat with a notepad in hand, scribbling a few ideas. Reeves grant, small business scholarships, community movie nights, free entry, hidden acts of kindness, secretly rewarded. He didn't need a press release or a parade. He just needed people to see each other again, to remember that kindness doesn't come with labels, that respect should never be earned by status, that true value often comes in silence, in service, and in simple humanity. Downstairs, the mall buzzed on. Customers shopped. Children played. Workers smiled. And somewhere inside, 2 security guards quietly helped a lost elderly woman find her car. This time, not because she looked like she belonged, but because she did. The stranger in the elevator. The following day brought a new kind of energy to Reeves Plaza. A shift. Not in merchandise, or music, or management, but in mood. The mall, which had quietly existed in the shadow of Los Angeles' more glamorous shopping centers, now pulsed with something more electric, something invisible, yet deeply felt. It wasn't about sales anymore. It wasn't about foot traffic. It was about people. The story of Keanu Reeves being kicked out of his own mall had circulated faster than wildfire through social media and small-talk conversations. But unlike a usual tabloid scandal, this one carried a lesson. A quiet man who owned the very walls others guarded had been dismissed because he didn't wear wealth on his sleeve. Instead of backlash, what followed was awe, admiration, reflection. And for Keanu, none of that mattered. What mattered was what came next. The morning elevator ride. On Thursday morning, Keanu arrived earlier than usual, choosing again the hidden employee entrance. He liked it that way. It felt honest. Today, he carried a small duffel bag and a coffee from a corner vendor. He was planning to stay longer, observe more, meet more people, learn from them. He pressed the elevator button to the staff level. As the doors slid open, he stepped in, only to find someone already inside. She was older, maybe in her early 70s, small-framed, her back slightly hunched. She held a mop in one hand, a cleaning bucket in the other. Her uniform was faded from years of washes, her shoes orthopedic and cracked at the edges. But her eyes, sharp, tired, yes, but alive. Keanu nodded gently. Morning. She nodded back, warily at first. Then she looked at him closer. You again, she said, tilting her head. Keanu smiled faintly. Me? She squinted. You were the guy everyone was whispering about yesterday. The movie star pretending to be a regular person. Keanu chuckled. I'm not pretending. I am a regular person. She raised an eyebrow, unamused. You own this place. Technically, yes, he replied. But that doesn't make me different from you. She scoffed. Tell that to my back after scrubbing tile grout for 8 hours. He offered a sympathetic smile. What's your name? Diane, she said. Been cleaning buildings for 41 years. Never had a single boss ride the elevator with me unless it was by accident. Maybe today was meant to happen. Diane eyed him for a moment longer. You're strange. Keanu grinned. You have no idea. Lessons from the invisible people. The elevator opened on the service floor. Diane shuffled out, and Keanu followed. She turned. You following me now? I want to learn, he said simply. If you're willing to let me. Diane blinked. Learn, cleaning. Learn what it's like to be you. She hesitated. You're serious. I usually am. With a reluctant grunt, Diane handed him a pair of gloves from her cart. Fine, but if you mess up my shine on those escalator rails, I'm kicking you out myself. For the next 2 hours, Keanu trailed Diane through the hidden corridors of the mall, places customers never saw. He wiped down handrails, changed trash bags, cleaned mirrors in public restrooms. He even helped pick up an unfortunate mess in the food court's kid zone. People stared, but Diane worked like she had every day since she was 29. Methodical, quiet, unnoticed. At one point, Keanu paused and asked, "Do you ever feel invisible here?" Diane looked up from her mop, surprised. "Every day." He nodded. "That's going to change." She narrowed her eyes. "Talk is cheap." "I know. That's why I'm going to show you." The anonymous survey. Later that afternoon, Keanu visited Brian again. "We need a feedback system," he said, pacing slowly. "Anonymous. Open to all staff. Janitors, security, shop clerks, food court teams. I want to know what it's really like to work here." Brian hesitated. "You're talking about a complete transparency initiative. That might ruffle feathers." Keanu shrugged. "Let them ruffle. If something's broken, we need to know. And we can't fix what we won't admit." Within hours, a digital portal was created and sent privately to all employees. No names, no judgment, just one question. "What is one thing you wish management knew about your experience here?" Within minutes, responses flooded in. The voices no one heard. "We're always short-staffed at closing, and we get blamed for things we can't control. Some managers talk down to us. They act like we're lucky just to be here. No one has ever said thank you for cleaning the restrooms after late-night events. Not once. There's a woman in the food court who pays for kids' lunches when they don't have enough. Her name's Alicia. She should be Employee of the Month every month. I love my job, but I wish someone would ask me how I'm doing sometimes." Keanu read every single one. Tears welled up in his eyes more than once. This wasn't just a mall. This was a living, breathing organism, and parts of it were hurting. The human wall. 3 days later, without announcement or fanfare, a new feature was installed at Reeves Plaza. It was a long, well-lit hallway between the food court and the library. Where advertisements used to hang, there were now photo frames. Real people. Smiling faces. Employees. Each with a placard that read their name, role, and a quote from their survey. With their permission. Some funny. Some wise. Some raw. Louis, the janitor's frame read, "I may not wear a suit, but I hold this place up every morning." Diane said, "The floors are clean because someone made them that way." Even the gruffest security guard had his moment. Thomas' photo included his quote, "I didn't recognize kindness in sneakers. I won't make that mistake again." Shoppers stopped and stared. Some clapped, others cried. Parents explained to their children that every person matters, not just the ones in designer stores. The hallway became known as the human wall. And Keanu, he visited it daily, not to admire his work, but to listen, to remember. An unusual meeting with Alicia. One afternoon, Keanu sat down at a plastic table in the food court with a young woman in a hairnet and apron. She was wiping down the table when he asked, "Are you Alicia?" She looked up, confused. "Yes. I heard about you," he said. "The way you help kids who don't have enough for lunch." She looked down, embarrassed. I just do what anyone decent would do." He reached into his bag and placed a white envelope on the table. "I started a fund," he said, "called the Alicia Fund. Every employee here can nominate someone in need. Kid, elder, family. We'll make sure no one in this mall ever goes hungry again." Her eyes filled. "I don't know what to say." Keanu smiled. "Say you'll keep being you." From judgment to justice. The story continued to grow, not in tabloids, but in people's hearts. Security guards became mentors. Janitors were cheered. Shop workers were thanked. Kindness started showing up in unexpected places. A luxury store manager loaned a dress to a teen for prom and asked for nothing in return. A group of employees pooled tips to help a coworker afford her mother's surgery. Shoppers began tipping food court workers just for smiling. Reeves Plaza had been built with steel, glass, and concrete, but now it was being rebuilt with something stronger: human decency. Back to the elevator. A week after their first ride together, Diane and Keanu met again. This time, she pressed the button before he could. "You coming, Mr. Movie Star?" she teased. He grinned. Always. She looked at him, this time with a spark of pride. You're not just strange. You're one of the good ones. Keanu looked at her seriously. You're one of the strong ones. As the elevator doors closed, neither of them spoke for a while. They didn't need to. They both knew something had changed, and it wasn't temporary. The boy with the sketchbook. The sun poured through the tall skylights of Reeves Plaza, casting soft golden beams over the polished tile floors. The weekend had arrived, and for the first time since opening, the mall felt truly alive. Families drifted in with strollers and sticky fingers. Couples sipped iced coffees as they window shopped. Laughter echoed from the arcade near the west entrance. Even the air smelled sweeter. Fresh pretzels, cinnamon buns, and some small flower stands' wild lilac perfume. KeanuReeves stood just beyond the entrance to the second floor, leaning against a railing, unnoticed. He wore a ball cap low over his brow, a plain navy jacket, and the kind of jeans no one would ever put on a billboard. Just how he liked it. He wasn't here for fanfare. He was here to see. But today, what he saw would shake him more deeply than any viral moment or press headline ever could. A quiet corner, a crumpled bag. Near the bookstore was a reading nook, quiet, tucked behind the magazines and art books. It was supposed to be a space where people could rest, read, or let their kids color on the built-in table. Keanu had personally designed the space, imagining a little haven for dreamers. But today, there was only one person there. A boy, maybe 9 or 10 years old, wearing a thin hoodie, way too big for him. Shoes scuffed down to the foam. A tear along the seam of his pants, hastily stitched. A paper bag sat beside him, its contents half spilled. A bruised apple, a crushed sandwich, and a bottle of water. But the boy wasn't eating. He was drawing. Keanu watched from a distance as the boy sketched quickly in a worn spiral notebook. Page after page filled with faces, animals, whole imagined worlds. His pencil flew, eyes fixed, tongue pressed between his teeth. Keanu stepped closer, quiet, gentle. "Mind if I sit?" he asked softly. The boy startled, pulling his notebook close. "Sorry, I didn't mean to scare you," Keanu added, sitting anyway, but leaving a respectful distance. The boy looked at him cautiously. "You're not security." Keanu smiled. "Not today." Silence. Then the boy spoke again. "You look like that guy from the movies." Keanu laughed gently. "I get that a lot." Introducing Micah. "My name's Micah," the boy said at last, though he didn't offer a handshake or eye contact. He just kept drawing. Keanu leaned a little to glimpse the notebook. "That's really good. You have a strong line style. Nice contrast in the shadows." Micah paused. "You know about art." "I know about heart," Keanu said. "And you've got it. Tons of it." Micah finally looked at him, wide-eyed. "Are you really?" Keanu winked. Micah whispered, "Whoa." They sat together in silence for a while, watching the world pass by from their quiet corner. "Why are you hiding here?" Keanu eventually asked. Micah shrugged. "Mom's working. She cleans the bathrooms on the bottom floor. I'm supposed to stay out of the way." "You're not in the way," Keanu said. "You belong right here." Micah looked down. "She says we're lucky to have this job, to be in this place, even if people look at us like trash." Keanu's jaw tightened, but he kept his tone soft. "Your mom's strong, and so are you." Micah hesitated, then flipped the notebook to a new page. He began sketching Keanu. Quickly, precisely. "You're hard to draw," he muttered. "I get that a lot too." The hidden cost of survival. That evening, Keanu tracked down Micah's mother. Her name was Layla. A single mom in her mid-30s, working night shifts to pay for a shared apartment with 2 other families. She had lost her job as a preschool teacher 2 years prior. Now she cleaned toilets in a luxury mall she couldn't afford to shop in. Keanu approached her with humility. "Micah's amazing," he said gently, catching her just after she clocked out. Layla looked up, tired and wary. Did he do something? No. He made my day better. She smiled faintly. He draws to forget. Says when he's sketching, he doesn't feel hungry. Keanu's heart broke a little. Can I show you something? He asked. He led her upstairs to the reading nook. Micah was still there, finishing the sketch. When he saw his mom, he jumped up. Mom, look, I drew him. Layla gasped when she saw it. Oh, baby, that's incredible. Keanu crouched beside the boy. Micah, how'd you like to go to an art camp this summer? The boy blinked. Like where people teach you to draw better. Exactly. It's a special place where artists help kids like you. I'll pay for everything. You deserve to be there. Layla started to protest. We couldn't possibly. You already paid, Keanu interrupted. You paid with long nights, aching feet, and loving your kid through all of it. Let me take care of this part. Tears welled in her eyes. Micah looked between them. Can I draw there every day? Every single day, Keanu promised. The Reeves Youth Arts Fund. The next morning, Keanu didn't go to the movie studio. He didn't take calls from producers or read new scripts. He called his accountant. I want to start a new branch of the Reeves Foundation, he said. Focus on kids, hidden artists, dreamers, those who just need a pencil and a little belief. That week, the Reeves Youth Arts Fund was launched quietly, without press releases or paparazzi. No big announcements, just a new website, a phone number, and a small team of volunteers. Kids like Micah from all over the city began to show up, submitting sketches, poems, dances, music clips, each one a spark waiting for ignition. Keanu reviewed each application himself. The boardroom clash. Not everyone at Reeves Plaza loved what Keanu was doing. Some executives in the mall's corporate wing voiced their complaints in a closed-door meeting. Sir, this isn't part of the original business model, one said. We're seeing increased foot traffic from low-income families. That could disrupt our high-end branding. Another added, we've had a few retailers quietly express concern. They think the new programs attract the wrong kind of attention. Keanu stood slowly. You think a hungry child with a gift is the wrong kind of attention? He asked. Silence. He looked each one of them in the eye. Let me be crystal clear. This mall was built for people. Not prestige, not profit margins, not exclusivity. You want a mall that only serves the rich. Sell your steak. I won't stop you. But Reeves Plaza stands for something. And we're just getting started. No one argued again. A gift from Micah. A week later, Keanu received a package at his quiet home just outside the city. No return address, just childlike handwriting on the label. Inside was a framed drawing. Micah had finished the sketch. Keanu sat on a park bench in the image, surrounded by little kids, each one holding a crayon or paintbrush. Behind him stood Layla, mopping the floor, but glowing with light. Above them all, a banner floated with one simple phrase. You saw us. Keanu sat with the drawing for a long time. He didn't cry, but he felt something deeper than tears. He felt changed. Reeves Plaza reimagined. By the end of the month, Reeves Plaza had undergone more than a PR shift. It had undergone a soul shift. A rotating art exhibit now hung along the East Wing, filled with pieces from local youth. QR codes allowed visitors to read the artists' stories and donate directly to their families or schooling. Every store was offered incentive bonuses for mentoring students, hosting workshops, or hiring teens for internships. And near the original reading nook, a brass plaque was installed. It read, "This space is dedicated to the unseen artists, unheard voices, and unnoticed kindness that make our world beautiful. You belong here. KR." The day the lights went out. It was a Thursday like any other, until it wasn't. Reeves Plaza, once buzzing with laughter, chatter, and the scent of fresh pastries, stood eerily silent by mid-afternoon. The lights flickered once, twice, and then died. Every screen, every ceiling bulb, every speaker, gone. The escalators froze mid-motion. The fountains stopped their gentle bubbling. Even the jazz music that usually wafted softly through the corridors vanished, replaced by quiet murmurs of confusion. A blackout. Total. Unplanned. And deeply inconvenient for a luxury shopping mall. Panic at first sight. Security scrambled to assess the situation. Emergency generators kicked in, but they only powered essential lights and emergency systems, red exit signs, stairwell lights, and one small panel near the central information desk. Shoppers began to panic, especially those stuck on escalators or in elevators. A child cried. An elderly man stumbled on the motionless stairs. Store owners started pulling out flashlights from drawers, while others just stood there, unsure of what to do. KeanuReeves was in the middle of the food court when the outage struck. He had just sat down with a young barista named George who wanted to show him a handmade recipe journal he'd been compiling. They'd been laughing about George's experimental espresso pudding when the lights died. Keanu stood immediately, calmly scanning the space. People were unsure, afraid, whispering. This was his mall. This was his responsibility. Keanu, the quiet leader. Without hesitation, Keanu walked to the center of the food court and climbed onto a bench. Not to be seen, but to be heard. He cupped his hands around his mouth. "Ladies and gentlemen," he called out, his voice calm but clear. "We're experiencing a power outage. Emergency systems are active. There's no danger. Please stay calm." People turned, instantly recognizing him, not as the celebrity, but as the quiet leader they'd heard so much about. "I promise," he continued, "we're going to take care of each other until this is fixed. If you see someone who needs help, an elderly person, a child, someone disoriented, be the one who steps up. Let's remind each other why this mall was built. For us. For the community. This is our chance to show who we are." A ripple of nods moved through the crowd. It was working. The unsung heroes stepped forward. Within minutes, a surprising transformation unfolded. A security guard used his flashlight to guide an elderly woman to the restroom. A group of teenagers helped carry strollers down the escalators manually. A blind man near the bookstore was gently guided to a bench by a mother with 2 kids, who offered him her phone in case he needed to make a call. At the smoothie bar, a staff member passed out free drinks before they could spoil, offering each with a smile. In the midst of it all, Keanu moved like a quiet force, calm, focused, encouraging others to step up. He wasn't issuing commands. He wasn't giving speeches. He was in it, walking the corridors, checking on people, comforting children, making sure no one felt alone. And that's when he saw her. The girl in the back room. A few feet from the children's reading area, a shop assistant stood nervously in the backroom doorway of a boutique. She looked pale, eyes darting left and right, trembling. Keanu approached gently. "Hey, you okay?" She startled, gripping a necklace display as if it were a lifeline. I have a heart condition," she whispered. "Pacemaker. When the lights went out, I panicked. I didn't know if the elevator would trap me again." Keanu stepped closer but kept a respectful distance. "You're safe," he said. "You're not alone. We'll stay right here until you're okay." She sat on the floor, breathing hard, clutching a small prayer pendant. "What's your name?" he asked softly. "Asha." "Asha," he repeated gently. "Beautiful name. It means hope, doesn't it?" She nodded. "I used to know someone named Asha," Keanu continued. "She once told me, when the lights go out, sometimes it's the best time to shine." That made her smile, just a little. "I'm scared," she whispered. "I am too," Keanu admitted. "But we're here, together. We'll wait for the light. Until then, let's be it for each other. A new kind of power. 2 hours passed. Still no full restoration. Power crews were working, but the system failure was more complex than expected. By now, Keanu had returned to the main atrium. Dozens of flashlights lit the space like tiny stars. People had begun to gather naturally around the community center, sitting cross-legged, talking, playing acoustic music, telling stories, reading books out loud. The blackout had turned a shopping mall into a village square. It was beautiful, imperfect, human. Layla, Micah's mom, came forward with a tray of cookies she had somehow managed to salvage from a nearby store's broken display case. Louis, the janitor, brought out blankets for kids to sit on. Even the high-end boutique workers emerged, offering bottled water and makeup wipes from luxury kits to freshen up the elderly and mothers with babies. And then, a voice spoke from the back. Thomas, the security guard, makes a stand. Thomas, the same security guard who once kicked Keanu out, stepped into the center of the crowd. He cleared his throat awkwardly. I just wanted to say something. People quieted. When this mall opened, I thought my job was to keep people out, to watch for problems. But today, I saw what happens when people come together, when we stop judging and just help. He turned to Keanu. I was wrong about you, but more than that, I was wrong about what this place could be. Keanu smiled warmly. Thomas raised a flashlight like a torch. This mall runs on power, but tonight it runs on people. A cheer broke out, soft at first, then louder. Applause. Laughter. A few people cried. In the dark, the mall had found its light. The power returns, but something's different. At 6:47 p.m., the lights returned. A hum, a flicker, and then a glow. The mall relit slowly, first the atrium, then the stores, then the escalators and fountains and speakers. But no one cheered. No one jumped up to shop. Because something had shifted. People stayed where they were, talking, smiling, connecting. A little girl in a wheelchair asked Keanu, "Can we have a blackout every week?" He laughed. Let's just keep the kindness. One final act before closing. As the evening drew to a close, Keanu visited the security room one last time. He asked for the footage from the atrium during the blackout. No press, he said. No drama. I just want to remember what we're capable of. He watched as people came together in the shadows, helping, hugging, singing, laughing. It looked more like a family reunion than a mall emergency. He turned to the night supervisor. Send copies of this to every team leader. Call it the light in the dark. Then he walked back to the elevator. Diane's wisdom. The elevator opened, and there was Diane, mop in hand as usual. Keanu grinned. You always show up at the right time. She nodded, stepping in with him. I clean during crisis too. He laughed. You saw what happened. She looked at him over her glasses. You still surprised people are good. He paused. No, I'm just always amazed by how good. Diane gave a rare, soft smile. You gave them space to shine. That's leadership, son. That's what this world's been starving for. As the elevator descended, Keanu looked ahead, already planning what needed to come next. A mall was a building. But what they had built was a movement. The visitor in the rain. It had been 3 weeks since the power outage, a moment now remembered as the day the lights went out in Reeves Plaza folklore. Employees still talked about it, not as a crisis, but as a revelation. Security guards had started calling it the kindness drill. Store owners referred to it as a human fire alarm. Teenagers on social media had even created a hashtag #LightInTheDark, where people shared their stories of unexpected kindness that day. Keanu Reeves, though quiet as ever, remained a steady presence in the background, walking the halls, checking in on staff, listening more than he spoke, offering a steady smile, a hand on the shoulder, or simply a look that said, "You matter." Reeves Plaza had transformed. But Keanu, He was about to face his own transformation, and it would come not through power outages or public speeches, but through a single unexpected visitor in the pouring rain. An ordinary morning, a storm brewing. The day began with an overcast sky. Keanu sat in the corner of the rooftop garden, a cup of black coffee steaming in his hands. He loved the rooftop, still one of the few spaces in the mall untouched by advertising or digital signage. Just benches, greenery, quiet. He scribbled in his notebook. Empathy isn't an event, it's a practice. Rain began to tap gently on the leaves around him, but he stayed seated, letting the drizzle wash over the garden like a hymn. He didn't notice the figure downstairs. Not yet. But she noticed him, a soaked stranger with a purpose. At 9:17 a.m., just before the main doors opened, a woman approached the front of Reeves Plaza. She wasn't dressed like a typical shopper. Her hair, streaked with silver, clung to her neck. Her brown coat, far too thin for the weather, was soaked through. She held a single manila envelope in her trembling hands, pressed close to her chest, like it was precious cargo. The guards at the front looked her over. One of them, Daryl, recognized the old instinct to dismiss someone who didn't fit the scene. But then he remembered Keanu, and he stepped forward kindly. "Ma'am, can I help you?" The woman nodded slowly, her lips pale. I'm here to see Mr. Reeves. KeanuReeves. Daryl blinked. "Do you have an appointment?" She shook her head. "No, but he'll want to see me. Please, just tell him the name Marisol." Daryl hesitated, then picked up the phone. 10 minutes later, Keanu was racing down the elevator, his heart thudding in his chest. The woman from the distant past. "Marisol," he whispered when he saw her, eyes wide. The woman looked up, older now, weathered but unmistakable. "Hello, Keanu," she said softly. "It's been a very long time." Keanu didn't speak. He simply stepped forward and hugged her. A deep, aching embrace. She was the woman who had once cradled him after his father left. The woman who made soup for his mother during her hardest winters. The woman who once taught him to play the piano in a cramped apartment in Toronto. His childhood neighbor, his second mother. Marisol Velasquez. She had vanished. After Keanu rose to fame, he had lost contact with many people from his early years. He tried to keep up, but between movies, travel, and grief, life had blurred. He never meant to lose her. She had always been the quiet one in the corner, serving, giving, never asking. She used to hand him lunch bags with handwritten notes when his mother worked night shifts. She taught him how to say thank you in 3 languages and used to whisper, "Kindness is your armor, Keanu. Never take it off." And now she was standing in his mall, soaked, shaking. The envelope. "I didn't want to come," Marisol admitted, sitting beside him in the private lounge. "But I didn't know who else to turn to." Keanu listened intently, offering her warm tea and a dry towel. "I've been living in a shelter," she continued. "Lost my job 2 years ago. Rent kept climbing. I sold my piano to afford medicine. But I'm getting older. My heart's not strong." Keanu's hands tightened on the edge of the table. She handed him the envelope. Inside were drawings, children's art, notes, photos of a tiny room with a bunk bed and bookshelf. "I've been teaching art classes at the shelter," she said, "trying to keep the kids hopeful. But the program's shutting down next week. Funding's gone." Keanu stared at the envelope, not with pity, but with purpose. He stood up immediately. "Come with me," he said. "Where?" "To start something that should have started a long time ago. A new wing is born." By that afternoon, plans had begun to repurpose the underused East Atrium into a permanent children's creativity and healing center, to be run by none other than Marisol Velasquez herself. It would be free. No child turned away. Art therapy, music lessons, story circles, healing spaces, for foster kids, for shelter kids, for any kid. Marisol wept when she saw the architectural sketches. "I don't deserve this," she whispered. Keanu knelt beside her. "You gave this to me long ago. I'm just giving it back." The story breaks again, but this time, it's beautiful. Within days, the story leaked. Not from Keanu, but from the community. Photos circulated of the aging woman who once taught a boy to dream, and how that boy, now a global icon, never forgot her kindness. The headlines weren't gossip. They were gratitude. KeanuReeves honors childhood mentor with free art school in his mall. Woman who fed a future star gets her flowers decades later. From soup kitchen to sacred space, Keanu's mall becomes a sanctuary for children. Keanu didn't give interviews, but he showed up every morning to help paint the walls of the center. One afternoon, he looked at a volunteer and said, "I used to think fame was a megaphone. Turns out, it's a paintbrush." Micah and Marisol meet. Weeks later, during the center's soft launch, Micah, the young sketch artist, was introduced to Marisol. She looked at his notebook, stunned by his raw talent. "You'll be our first student," she said, smiling. Micah beamed. "Will you teach me piano too?" "I thought you'd never ask." Keanu watched them from a distance, hands in his pockets, a rare smile on his face. The mall that once kicked him out was now lifting others up. Diane's words, once more. That evening, in the elevator again, Diane gave him a look. "Didn't I tell you? You're strange." Keanu laughed. "Still." She nodded. "Strange enough to care. Strange enough to remember where you came from." She pressed the elevator button. He looked out over the mall, now a beacon of inclusion, light, and love, and whispered, "May we never forget the hands that held us when no one else saw." A tribute before the world. 6 months had passed since that rainy morning. Since the envelope. Since Marisol Velasquez, the quiet woman who once gave KeanuReeves warm meals and wisdom during his fractured childhood, returned, drenched and trembling, into his life. 6 months since Reeves Plaza transformed from a sleek, soulless commercial center into something far deeper. A sanctuary. A community. A living heartbeat of kindness. And now, it was time for something Keanu never expected. Something he never wanted, but desperately deserved. The day of the dedication. It was a crisp Saturday morning. Bright blue skies. The kind of day that begged families to come out, children to laugh, and hearts to open. Flyers had been posted quietly around the mall in the week leading up. Join us for a community celebration. Live music, storytelling, youth art gallery, and a surprise guest of honor. Keanu didn't think much of it. He had helped plan the logistics, even funded the balloon arch, food, and rental chairs. But he assumed the surprise guest was a local hero, maybe a teacher or youth advocate. Never once did he imagine. It was him. Micah's big reveal. At 10:01 a.m., a hush fell over the packed atrium. The same one where panic had once unfolded during the blackout months before. Now, it overflowed with families, musicians, food vendors, and laughter. In the center of the space stood a podium, and beside it, a large canvas, veiled with a white sheet. Micah, now freshly 11, stepped up to the microphone, holding Keanu's hand. He was wearing a little suit jacket, his shoes still scuffed but now full of pride. "Hi," Micah said nervously, glancing up at Keanu. I'm Micah." A chuckle from the crowd. "And I used to sit by the bookstore drawing superheroes. Then this guy," he looked up again, "showed me I could be one." The audience grew quiet again. "My mom says sometimes angels wear jeans and don't know it. I think Keanu is like that." Keanu blinked, lips parting slightly, a slow exhale. Micah continued, "So we made you something. We hope you don't mind." He turned toward the easel and pulled the sheet away. Underneath was a massive hand-painted mural, "The Heart of Reeves Plaza," the title in bold brush strokes at the top. And below it, a sprawling image painted by dozens of children, teens, and volunteers. Keanu sat at the center of the image, not in a suit, not on a red carpet, but exactly how he looked when he'd been mistaken for a loiterer months earlier. Hoodie, jeans, scuffed shoes. But around him were people. Louis, the janitor, Diane with her mop, Layla with her cleaning cart, Micah with his sketchbook, Marisol playing the piano, Thomas, the security guard, holding a flashlight, Alicia handing out food, and in bold across the bottom, written in kids' handwriting, "Because he saw us first. The world watches." What Keanu didn't know was that the entire event was being live-streamed, not for publicity, but because this story had become too big to contain. News outlets had picked up on the mural unveiling through whispers on community forums. Bloggers, TikTokers, parents who had quietly filmed Keanu working alongside volunteers in the art wing. So when the curtain dropped, the world watched and wept. A reporter's question. After the ceremony, Keanu was approached by a young reporter, clearly nervous, microphone shaking. "Mr. Reeves," she began, "you've quietly changed hundreds of lives here, maybe thousands. Why didn't you want the credit?" Keanu smiled gently, glancing around at the families, the staff, the kids playing with chalk on the pavement. "Because I already got paid." She blinked. "What do you mean?" He pointed to Micah, who was now showing his sketchbook to a younger child with Down syndrome. "That kid knows he matters now. That's the only check I'll ever need to cash." Marisol's final gift. Later that evening, as the celebration dwindled and the cleanup began, Marisol approached Keanu in the rooftop garden. She held something behind her back. "I never thought I'd live to see a day like this," she said. Keanu chuckled. "Neither did I." She handed him a wrapped gift. He unwrapped it slowly and gasped. It was his old piano book, the one she had taught him from when he was 12. Slightly water damaged, the cover taped, pages worn from love and years. "I saved it," she said. "Figured you'd want it back someday." Keanu touched the keys printed on the cover with reverence. "Thank you," he whispered. Then she leaned closer and added, "But I expect you to come teach at the youth center next week. No escaping it." He laughed through a lump in his throat. Deal. The final surprise. As Keanu walked back into the mall with the piano book tucked under his arm, he noticed a new fixture had been installed in the hallway between the library and food court. A bronze statue. Simple, life-sized, humble. It was of a man in a hoodie, sitting on a bench, legs crossed, holding a coffee in one hand and a sketchbook in the other. At the base of the statue was an engraving. "Kindness is not a performance. It is a choice made in silence, for people who may never know your name. Care." Keanu stood before it in stunned silence. Behind him, the hum of the mall continued, kids laughing, music playing, friendships growing. He whispered to no one in particular, "I never wanted a statue." A voice behind him said, "That's why you deserved one." He turned. It was Diane. She nodded toward the statue. "Don't worry. They didn't make your shoes too clean." They both laughed. 6 months ago, he was kicked out of this place. Now, he had been etched into its soul, not as a star, but as a servant, not as a celebrity, but as a catalyst. That night, Keanu walked the entire mall alone one last time before heading home. He touched the walls gently, peered through windows, smiled at notes left behind by children taped to storefronts. In the reading nook, Micah's latest drawing hung proudly. In the art wing, piano music played softly, recorded by Marisol's students. In the staff hallway, Diane's mop bucket glistened, freshly cleaned and polished, just like her floors. And in the very spot where he had once been escorted out by security, Keanu stood, closed his eyes, and whispered, "Let every place that once rejected you become a space you rebuild with grace."